I'm starting the review with the first design that was sent in. Normally I go alphabetically, and I thought, no, I'm not going to this time. I'll do them in the order that they were sent. And the first one that came in was Dawn's. And this is her design. And this was her stitch out. Right, now Dawn sent me, and I'm always grateful for these, a little synopsis of what she'd done. Landscape scene, machine, an MB4, and sulky 40 weight thread. Loose density layers and a landscape scene. Never done either before. I watched the video 2 times and wrote lots of notes, and then spent a whole day looking at pictures and clip art on my computer. That's the big problem, isn't it? When you're allowed to use any picture, it actually makes it that little bit more difficult. But I wanted you all to be reasonably kind to yourself and not start on something complicated. Sorting the colours was hard, as I used sulky, and everything I pulled out of my stash MBX didn't have in the list. I found thread colours that were close and did my colour blocks. I then pulled out my thread colours that I chose to use and cut some off, and then lay them over each other to recheck the colours. I chose a simple clip art as I wasn't really sure how it was going to turn out. I have never stitched out a design without underlay and with the loose fill, so I wasn't sure if it would distort the fabric as it's stitched, and if I would need to allow for this. Well, MBX was a pain. It put travel lines in where I didn't want them, so I had to use travel on edge, make trims and jumps, and change my stitch angles to remove them. Well, by now, John, you'll have seen the previous video, which is how I do it, and I know it was very naughty of me not to say it before, but you don't really have to worry too much about the travel lines being where you don't want them. Do need to worry a bit about travel on edge, because that gives you a hard line, and you don't get a softening where one colour blends into another, on things that are overlapping one another. Doing a colour wash design with thread is a very loose, how can I put this? It's a very free form way of doing a design. You're not out to create a totally realistic design. And it really doesn't matter if you've got whip stitches in there or travel lines. It becomes a problem when you're doing a more formal type of design. Then you don't want the travel lines. But when you're doing colour fills and blending colours together, sometimes those lines add to the design. And you might not think so when you first stitch it out. But you have got to look at them at arm's length. Don't put them under a microscope. Look at them from a distance. And it really does add something to a colour wash design if you've got the odd whippy line, especially if it's buried under another layer of colour. Anyways, back to yours. I'm happy how my first try turned out, and I guess if I had been digitising a long time, I might have solved these problems with trims, etc. If I had said to you, I want you to do a landscape, but I want you to use full density on everything, then I would have said, yes, fine, I don't want any errant travel lines. But you're not. You're doing something where it's almost impossible to totally get rid of travel lines without stitching on edge. The stitch out, well, it is so soft. I really love the feel. I am going to play more as I like the way it's stitched. Just won't be a landscape. Now that's a shame because the landscapes actually work very well for this. Now if you're going to do something like an apple or an orange, that's when you've got to worry about travel lines. Landscapes? No, it's not so important. That's why I asked you to do a landscape. It's got a lot more freedom in it. You can use loose density fills for doing fruits, people, plants, but there you've got to be more strict. There you do have to worry about your starting and your end points. And if you can't travel, use the trims. But doing something like a landscape, it's more freeform. And that's what I wanted you to try, was something which was more freeform. Anyway, thank you, Maggie, for another great challenge. Sure was out of my comfort zone. Yep. P.S. May try with Ember to see if I can get better results. Dawn. If you use Ember, don't use fill number 1. It will set up a very strong twill pattern. There's a random fill and there's, I think fill number 2 gives less of a ridged effect. Okay, so let's go and look at your design now. I'm just going to close this. Right, I like the way it's stitched out. I also like the way you've got some form in here with the 2 layers of that colour. There we go. One fill opposing the other. Actually, it looks though you may have 3 layers there. Yep. And 3 layers there. White. Now, when you put white over another colour, it doesn't have that much of an effect. White is a very weak colour. If you want something to be highlighted, don't put another colour on that spot. Right. Then there was the pink. Let me just get this off of 3D. There we go. And then we have the grey. Let me just check the object details. 150. Oh, you did go loose. How many layers did you actually use? You only used one, two. That gave you a base density of 7.5 on this area. Right. So here you've got one, 2, 3, 4. Right, now I see why you used the 150. Double layer in the sea. I like that. You'd got complete layer of green. 1, 2, 3 layers. Your palest colour was at the bottom. No, in the middle. So I'm going to move that down. I'll get rid of the simulated stitch. That would have allowed your dark aqua, then your blue, to shine up through this. But I'll put that back where it was. Oh, go away. Unless it only ever comes up when you don't want it to. Right. And your trees. Your grass. I like that. And I like your double layering on your trees. Now, me being me, I would have been tempted to put in shadows or jagged, because that's me. But for a first time, and you're not used to doing loose density fills, and you're not used to doing something which doesn't have an underlay. Now, you didn't actually say whether or not it distorted your fabric. There will be some distortion, but it's never quite as heavy as if you did this in your basic standard fill. And of course, your first loose density layer acts as an underlay. I think your stitch out turned out well. I hope you do try a few more. It won't be just yet, but I will do a series on how you can use loose densities to colour and shade things like flowers, because that's where it really comes into its own. But you also have to be very, very disciplined, which means no travel lines, you know, the whippy ones. You've really got to consider the tool you use and where you have your start and end points. But as a beginning, this has worked very nicely. And I'm glad you are pleased with it. And it does give a nice soft finish, doesn't it? Okay, now I've got to move on.